At 4 a.m., the basement was supposed to be silent, a place where old boxes slept and pipes hummed softly in the dark. But what I saw down there felt wrong in a way I still can't explain. It was the kind of moment that makes your heart freeze before your feet even move. I had come to stay with my son and daughter-in-law for a few days, hoping to spend quiet time with my grandchildren. Their home always felt warm, peaceful, a safe place. But that night, the soft crying I heard from the basement pulled me out of bed and into a stillness that didn't feel like theirs. I didn't know then that a single step toward that door would change how I saw my family forever. The sound reached me before the cold did, soft, almost like someone humming through a cracked window. It slipped up through the floorboards, threading itself between the shadows of the hallway. The house was supposed to be sleeping at that hour, holding its breath the way homes do when everyone inside is safe. But that night, it felt like the walls were listening, and something beneath them was whispering back. I stepped out of my room slowly, letting the door close behind me without a sound. The moonlight from the window stretched thin across the floor, like it didn't want to be there either. Every board under my feet creaked in a way it never had before, sharp, guilty, like it knew I shouldn't be awake. A cold drift followed me, settling over my arms, slipping under my sleeves. The warmth that usually lived in this house, kids breathing softly in their beds, the water heater humming, even the faint smell of detergent, felt muted, buried. The sound came again. Not a cry, not exactly. It was too steady, too practiced, like someone was trying to sound upset without breaking. I glanced toward the kids' bedrooms. Both doors were closed. Their nightlights glowed faint and steady. They never wandered at night, never. So who was down there? I moved through the hallway, each step sinking heavier. The air thickened the closer I got to the stairwell. My fingers hesitated over the light switch, but didn't touch it. Something about the darkness felt safer than knowing. The whispering grew clearer, small, breathy sobs timed almost like a metronome. Too slow for panic, too soft for fear, more like rehearsal. My hand brushed the doorknob. It was colder than the rest of the house, colder than metal had any right to be. I held onto it anyway, letting the chill climb up my arm. For a moment, I listened. No shifting, no footsteps, just that quiet, patterned crying, like someone trying to remember how sadness was supposed to sound. My breath fogged faintly in the air. In my own home, that was the moment my chest tightened. Something was wrong, not just unusual, wrong. I leaned forward, pressing my ear lightly to the door. The wood felt damp, or maybe it was just the cold seeping through it. The crying stopped, instantly, as if the person below could feel my presence through the floor. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was aware. A slow scrape echoed from below, not loud, just enough for the hair on my arms to rise. Something being moved, or dragged, and then a breath, long, shaky, not belonging to any child I've ever known. My fingers tightened around the doorknob. I should have opened it. I should have called someone. I should have done anything except stand there, frozen between instinct and dread. But sometimes the body knows before the mind does, and mine knew I wasn't alone on that side of the door. The crying didn't return. The scrape didn't repeat. The house settled into a silence so deep it felt like it was waiting on me. I stepped back slowly, keeping my eyes on the door, wondering how something so thin could hold back whatever was breathing behind it. The hallway felt longer now, colder, like I had accidentally stepped into a part of the night I wasn't meant to witness. I looked once more at the basement door, its edges dark, its handle still glinting with the chill of it, and I whispered into the quiet, "What is down there?" The house didn't answer, but something beneath it was listening. The door gave a soft sigh when I pushed it open, the kind of sound a house makes when it wants to warn you. But gently, a thin strip of light cut through the darkness, spilling across my feet like it was reaching for me. It shouldn't have been there. Not at that hour, not in that room. The basement was supposed to sleep at night, a quiet, untouched space below the hum of family life. But tonight it was awake, and something inside it was calling me down. I stood at the top of the stairs, holding the doorknob like it was the only warm thing left in the house. The air drifting up from below felt different from the hallway. Cooler, heavier, carrying a faint metallic smell I couldn't place. My son never left the basement light on. Not once in all the years I'd visited. He'd joke that electricity wasn't free, even if his wife thought it grew on trees. But the light was on now, and the crying, if that's what it was, no longer floated through the floorboards. It was more present, more human, like someone breathing into cupped hands. I swallowed hard, gripping the railing. The wood felt damp under my palm, as if the cold from below had risen to meet me halfway. I took the first step down, and the stair groaned in protest. The humming sound I'd heard earlier vibrated gently through the wall, a steady, unfamiliar hum, not like the water heater or the freezer. Something else, something new. The light wasn't bright. It flickered softly, casting long shadows that stretched up the staircase, reaching past me as if the basement itself knew I was coming. The crying had a rhythm now, not frantic, not broken, just quiet, practiced, like someone who had cried so long they had learned how to do it without making a mess. With every step, my breath shortened. My heartbeat climbed up into my throat. And still, I kept going, one hand on the railing, the other hovering near the wall, afraid to touch anything. Halfway down, I paused. Something in me, something old, instinctive, told me to turn around, close the door, and pretend I had never heard a thing. But the light kept flickering at the bottom, and the crying sounded closer, clearer. It didn't sound like a child. That was the first thing that truly frightened me. There was weight in the sobs, age, a kind of exhaustion that children don't carry. And the longer I listened, the more I realized the crying wasn't coming from one person. It was too steady, too controlled, almost timed. A breath escaped me, shaky and thin. Why was there light in a room no one used at night? And who, or what, was awake down there with it? I reached the bottom step and stopped, just before my foot touched the concrete floor. The humming grew louder, vibrating softly under my toes. The light leaking from the half-open door at the back of the basement quivered, like someone was moving inside. The crying stopped, all at once, and in that sudden silence, I felt the entire house exhale behind me, as if relieved I had finally come far enough that turning back would be impossible. I stared at the narrow slice of bright light between the door and its frame, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. I whispered to myself, barely breathing, "Who's down here?" The basement didn't answer, but the light flickered again, like it was waiting for me to see. I was halfway down the basement stairs when the house seemed to exhale behind me. A thin draft curled around my ankles, carrying the cold scent of concrete and something older. The bulb above me flickered once, then held. That was when I saw it, a shadow sliding across the far wall, small and hunched, like it was trying to disappear into itself. Emotional setup. The basement had always been quiet, a place for stored memories and forgotten boxes. But that night, it felt different, rearranged somehow, as if someone had walked through it with a purpose I couldn't understand. I paused on the fourth step, my hand tightening around the railing. The metal felt colder than it should have been, almost trembling with a pulse of its own. Below me, the concrete floor stretched out in narrow paths, carved between boxes that hadn't been moved in years. My son and daughter-in-law never came down here. Neither did the kids. This was a place meant for dust, not footprints. But I could hear something, a low humming, steady and strange, vibrating up through the soles of my feet. It reminded me of a song someone whispers when they're trying to calm themselves, or trying not to cry. I leaned forward, just enough for my eyes to adjust to the dim light. That's when I saw it again, a small figure in the corner, wrapped in a blanket that reached all the way to the floor. The shape trembled, barely noticeable at first. Then again, harder, like someone's shoulders when they're silently sobbing. I swallowed, my throat tightening. "Hello?" I whispered, though my voice barely made it past my lips. No answer. The humming continued, rising a little, then dipping as if it were breathing. The boxes nearest to the figure were pushed aside, forming thin aisles that made no sense. They looked like someone had been pacing in circles, wearing the floor with their fear. I took another step down. The stair creaked under my weight, a long, slow sound that stretched through the room like a warning. The figure twitched. For a moment, I thought it might be one of the kids hiding again. But the shape was too small, too still, too broken. The blanket shifted just slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something pale beneath it. Not skin exactly, not cloth either. Something that moved like it wasn't sure of its own strength. The humming faltered, stopped. Then, in the heavy silence that followed, I heard a breath, shallow, uneven, almost afraid of being heard. My hands shook around the railing. "Are you hurt?" I asked, softer this time. Still nothing, but now the trembling grew stronger, almost violent. as if my voice had frightened it instead of soothed it. I stood frozen between the next step and the one behind me, unsure which direction was safer. The basement felt smaller now, as though the darkness was leaning in closer, waiting to see what I would do. The figure curled deeper into the corner, shrinking from the light, from me, from whatever truth it held. And the humming, it started again, but slower, more desperate. Like a warning whispered through cracked lips, I tightened my grip on the railing, because suddenly, I wasn't sure if I had come down here to help something, or to see what had already been waiting for me. The basement light hummed above me, a tired bulb suspended in a silence that didn't feel like my own. As my eyes slowly adjusted, the shadows began to shift into shapes I recognized. The old freezer, the dusty bicycles, the boxes stacked like forgotten stories. But then, something unfamiliar, a door, one that didn't belong to the basement I thought I knew. And somewhere behind it, faint but heartbreaking, came the sound of someone quietly crying. I stood still, letting the cold settle into my bones as if the house wanted me to listen before I moved. My son had renovated years ago, repainting walls and organizing storage, but not once had he mentioned a new room. I had been down here dozens of times. I would have seen it. The door wasn't subtle. It sat at the back of the basement, half hidden behind towers of boxes as if someone had tried to forget it was there. The crying drifted through the stillness again, softer now, like a child trying to swallow its own sobs. But the figure I'd seen in the corner, it wasn't making a sound. A chill crawled up my spine. Whatever was behind that door, it was alive and hurting. I stepped forward, the soles of my shoes brushing against the cold concrete. The path between the boxes was narrow, almost too narrow, as if someone had deliberately carved it to reach that door. Without attracting attention, a warm light seeped out from the thin gap beneath the door, a soft yellow glow that didn't match the harsh basement bulb overhead. The smell reached me next, a faint sting of bleach, sharp enough to cut through the dust and dampness of the room. My breath hitched. I turned once toward the trembling bundle in the corner, but it stayed still, too still, as if holding its breath with me. The crying behind the door broke again, a small, trembling sound that didn't echo, but thudded gently against the wood as if someone were leaning on the other side. My hand hovered just inches from the handle, stopping in midair as if the cold itself had grasped my wrist. Why would my son hide a door? Why hide it behind boxes, behind silence? Behind fear? I let my fingers brush the metal. It was warm, strangely warm, like someone had touched it only moments before. The crying grew softer, then paused completely, leaving only the hum of the basement bulb. For a breathless second, it felt like whoever was behind the door knew I was standing there, listening, waiting. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "Hello?" I whispered. The silence that followed felt heavier than any answer could have been. The warm light flickered beneath the door, trembling as if touched by someone moving inside. I stepped back just slightly, my heartbeat slowing into a heavy, uncertain rhythm. The basement felt tighter now, the air dissolving into bleach and fear. And though my hand dropped from the handle, the question clung to me like dust in the dim light. What kind of room needs to be hidden behind boxes? And what kind of crying needs this much silence to survive? The basement felt colder than it should have, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. A thin line of warm light glowed beneath the hidden door, flickering softly like a candle fighting to stay alive. I stood in front of it, frozen in a silence that didn't feel like mine. And in that silence, a single thought pulsed through my chest. My grandchildren were sleeping just one floor above this. The weight of that truth settled over me like dust. I pressed my palm lightly against my coat, feeling the faint tremble in my own fingers. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something older, deeper. The kind of instinct that rises in a mother long before she understands the reason. Upstairs, the house had been peaceful, soft nightlights glowing in the hallway, the gentle rhythm of small breaths drifting from the kids' room. But down here the air changed. Every shadow stretched a little too long. Every hum from the old pipes seemed to echo in ways I'd never heard before. And the hidden door at the back of the basement, the one I'd never seen, never been told about, sat there like a secret waiting to swallow the whole room. I leaned closer, trying to steady my breathing. The crying behind the door had quieted but not gone. I could feel it more than hear it now, like a heartbeat pressed into wood. I closed my eyes for a moment, the picture of my grandchildren appearing behind my eyelids. their small hands, their messy hair, their trust. Trust in their parents, trust in this house, trust in me. And suddenly all the wrongness in the room sharpened. A mother knows when a place is safe. A grandmother knows when it isn't. My hand hovered just inches from the doorknob again. But this time I wasn't thinking about curiosity. I was thinking about danger. The soft hum behind the door grew louder, vibrating faintly through the floor. It wasn't the hum of a normal appliance. It felt controlled, contained. A whisper of air seeped from under the door, warm, sharp, carrying the faint smell of bleach. I took a step back, not in fear, but calculation. I needed to understand what lay behind that door before I dared to open it. The children depended on it, even if they didn't know. I leaned in, pressing my ear lightly against the wood. The surface was warmer than it should have been. Too warm for a basement that felt like winter. And beneath the hum, beneath the faint crying, there was breathing. Slow, measured, not the breath of a child, not the breath of someone asleep. Someone was awake behind that door, someone who didn't want to be found. A chill ran down my spine so suddenly it stole the air from my lungs. The house didn't feel like my son's anymore. It felt like a stranger's. I stepped back, my heart beating too close to my throat. The basement lights flickered, just once, as if warning me. I looked up the stairs, toward the quiet ceiling that separated me from the kids. Whatever was behind that door, I couldn't let it touch them. But as I stood there, wrapped in the dim hum of the hidden room, one question echoed louder than any other. If my instincts were screaming not to open it, what would happen if I did? The house was holding its breath again. I could feel it in the way the air trembled, thin as moth wings. Down in that dim basement, the single bulb swayed on its chain, casting a slow circle of yellow across the concrete floor. I stood still, afraid even to breathe too loudly. The crying behind the small cellar door had quieted to a soft, tired whimper, like it knew something I didn't. And then I heard them. Footsteps, slow, heavy ones, not a child's shuffle, not my daughter-in-law's light tread. Something older, more deliberate. The first step made the ceiling dust tremble. The second made my heart drop into my stomach. I lifted my head, eyes tracing the wooden beams above me as if I could see through them. It was past midnight, the hour the house usually surrendered its noises and slept. But tonight, the boards groaned like they remembered someone. I stepped back, deeper into the basement shadows, the cold gathering around my ankles like water. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. I held my breath. But they didn't descend. They moved past the basement door instead, slow enough that I could count each creak, back and forth, like someone pacing the length of the hallway, like someone waiting for their moment. I pressed my hand against the rough stone wall, grounding myself in the cold bite of it. I tried to listen. For my son, his soft snoring that usually seeped through the cracks of the floorboards. But the house had gone too still, too attentive. The crying behind the door softened even more, turning into faint breaths, almost like relief. The pacing continued, steady as a heartbeat. Whoever, whatever kin was up there, didn't bother to hide their presence. A soft drag at the end of each step, a tired shift of weight, as though their legs remembered a burden they no longer carried. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence press against me. Maybe it was my son, maybe. But he never walked like that. His steps were hurried, restless. These steps, these were patient, measured, older than him, older than me. The boards above me creaked again, but this time, they stopped right above the cellar door. I looked up, feeling the back of my neck prickle. The bulb flickered once, then steadied. A breath, not mine, eased through the cracks, soft and tired, as if leaning close to listen. I felt the crying behind the door fade completely, the room falling into a strange, fragile hush. Then the footsteps moved once more, heading slowly down the hallway, away from the basement. Not toward a room, not toward a person, just wandering, as if searching for something that the house no longer held. When the last creak vanished, I exhaled the breath I'd been clinging to. But the silence that followed didn't comfort me. It only asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. And in that dim basement, surrounded by shadows that felt suddenly too familiar, I realized something quietly terrifying. Whoever was awake at this hour wasn't supposed to be. The basement felt colder than it should have. Not the kind of cold that comes from concrete, floors, or winter creeping in. Through bad insulation, this cold felt aware. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to the quiet hum of the house settling above me. The single bulb overhead flickered once, its glow stretching shadows long across the walls. And in the far corner, where the darkness pooled thickest, the old blanket I'd been avoiding looking at finally moved. Just a small shift, but enough to steal the breath from my throat. I didn't step closer at first. I just stared, my eyes trying to make sense of the shape beneath the faded wool. The house had been still for so long that any motion felt wrong, like the room itself had flinched. Then the blanket slipped, only an inch or two, but it revealed something I wasn't prepared for: pale fingers. Thin, tense, gripping the fabric like it was the only thing holding their world together. They trembled. Not wildly, not dramatically, but with the controlled shaking of someone trying very hard not to fall apart. I swallowed hard and forced my feet to move, each step slow, measured, gentle, like approaching a fawn caught in a fence. "Hey," I whispered, my voice softer than the dust shifting beneath me. "You're all right? I won't hurt you." The figure didn't answer, didn't even look up. Their shoulders curled inward, shrinking from a fear I hadn't earned. That was the first moment I understood. They weren't afraid of me. I stopped only a few feet away, close enough to hear their shallow breaths. They weren't crying, just breathing like every inhale cost something. The bulb buzzed overhead, casting a weak halo around us both. But their gaze stayed fixed on the opposite side of the basement, on the small, hidden door wedged behind the shelves. Their bodies stiffened each time a soft sound drifted from that direction, the kind you only hear when you're listening too closely. I followed their stare to the door, that door I hadn't dared to open. The wood around its frame seemed darker somehow, as if it had soaked up years of things better left unspoken. I turned back to the figure. Their fingers gripped the blanket tighter, knuckles whitening, chest rising faster. Not because of me, because whatever was behind that door had its own gravity, its own presence. The room felt too small then, too quiet, like the air was waiting for something to happen. I crouched down, trying to catch their eyes, but they kept them low, fixed on the floor, the way a person might if they feared that looking up would invite something closer. The trembling deepened. A soft thud echoed from behind the door. Barely there, but enough. The figure flinched so sharply the blanket slipped again, revealing a forearm thin as a whisper. I didn't touch them, didn't speak again. Some moments break if you breathe too loudly. So I just sat there, letting the silence settle between us like dust. And in that quiet, with the basement colder than ever, one question pressed against my ribs. What could terrify someone this deeply? And why was it hiding behind that door? The basement had been holding its breath long before I realized I was holding mine. Dust hung in the air like tiny ghosts, drifting through the single cone of light cast by the bulb overhead. Every sound felt louder down there. The slow creak of the house settling, the faint hum of the refrigerator upstairs, my own heartbeat tapping against my ribs. And then, cutting through it all, came the faintest click, soft, precise. A sound that didn't belong to this room or to me. For a moment I thought I had imagined it. But then the hidden door, that narrow, half-forgotten one wedged behind the shelves, shifted. Just enough for a sliver of warm light to spill out, a thin, trembling line across the cold concrete floor. It didn't reach my feet, but it felt like it was reaching for me. I stood perfectly still, barely even daring to blink. Silence stretched, thinner and thinner, like a thread ready to snap. Behind me in the corner, the blanket-wrapped figure reacted before I could. They curled tighter, pulling their knees to their chest, covering their head with shaking hands. A muffled whimper escaped them, not loud, barely even human. More like the sound a wounded animal might make when it's trying not to be found. The light from the cracked door flickered, as if something inside had moved. Then came the rustling, soft, uneven, something shifting around on the other side of the door. I couldn't see anything. Not really, just that warm glow breathing in and out as shadows passed through it. And then, the whisper, low, wet around the edges, words I couldn't understand, like someone speaking from behind cupped hands. The kind of whisper that feels directed at you, even if you know it shouldn't be. Every instinct I had grew sharp at once. My legs wanted to run. My hands wanted to reach for something, anything to protect myself. But my body refused to move. Fear can pin you down in the gentlest, quietest ways. I stood there, a breath caught halfway in my throat, listening to something I knew I wasn't supposed to hear. The figure in the corner began rocking, tiny movements that made the blanket rise and fall. They weren't afraid of me, weren't hiding from me. No, their terror was fixed entirely on that door, on whatever lived behind it. I stepped back without meaning to, the floor cold beneath my heels. The whisper inside the room faded, drifting into a silence thick enough to swallow sound. The warm light dimmed as the door slowly eased shut again. Not all the way, just to a narrow line, as if whoever or whatever was inside wanted to leave a reminder. I stared at that thin glow until my eyes burned, until the blanket in the corner stilled, until the basement felt cold enough to seep into my bones. Something was behind that door, and now, it knew we were out here. The first thing I noticed wasn't the light. It was the dust floating through it, slow, drifting, unbothered by the weight that had suddenly settled in my chest. The hidden door was still cracked open, just enough for that warm beam to spill out, carving a thin line across the basement floor. It didn't belong to a place this cold, this forgotten. It felt like an invitation, or a warning. I stood there, barely breathing, letting the silence stretch long enough to hear my pulse in my ears. The air smelled faintly of chemicals now, a sharp, unfamiliar scent cutting through the dampness of the concrete walls. I took a single step closer, careful not to disturb the trembling figure curled in the corner. The blanket around them rose and fell in small, unsteady breaths. They didn't lift their head. They didn't look at me. Their whole body was angled toward that open door, as if any movement might wake whatever slept behind it. I leaned just enough to see inside, not far, just through that narrow golden slit of light. And what I saw stopped my blood cold. Shelves, metal ones, stacked with small bottles, gauze, gloves, medical supplies that had no place in a family home, no place in my son's home. A table stood in the center of the room, and on it, something was covered by a white cloth, too still, too perfectly shaped. I felt my stomach twist, a slow, heavy knot forming deep inside me. Nothing about this was normal. Not the supplies, not the table, not the trembling person in the corner, not this room I hadn't even known existed. I turned to look at them. The figure, the one refusing to speak, refusing to move. The blanket had shifted when they curled tighter, just enough for something to slip free. A small glint caught the warm light from the door. A bracelet, thin, silver, with a tiny charm shaped like a flower. The same flower I had watched her touch absently during dinners, during long car rides, during quiet afternoons with the baby. My daughter-in-law's bracelet. I felt the floor tilt under my feet. My breath snagged on nothing and held there. It didn't make sense, not at first. Why she would be hiding, why she would be trembling, why she would be down here at all. And then the second question hit harder than the first. What was my son hiding? The light from the cracked door flickered again, as if someone on the other side had shifted. The shape beneath the cloth didn't move, but the shadows around it did. A quiet rustle, barely a sound at all, drifted into the basement. The figure in the corner whimpered, a sound that made my heart twist in ways I didn't want to understand. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Her fear told me everything I wasn't supposed to see. And suddenly, the truth wasn't a question anymore. It was a doorway. Opening, waiting. The ceiling trembled before the sound reached me. A soft thud. Then another. Footsteps. Quick, uneven, like someone searching in the dark with shaking hands. Dust drifted down in tiny spirals, catching the faint golden line of light still spilling from the cracked hidden door. The basement felt even smaller now, air tight against my lungs. Somewhere above, a door opened sharply, then shut with the kind of force that didn't belong to midnight. Something was wrong, or maybe everything was. I pressed my back against the cold wall, trying to listen past the pounding of my own heartbeat. The house had never sounded like this before. Frantic, alert, awake in a way that felt almost human. The footsteps moved across the floorboards again. Faster this time, stopping right above me. The floor creaked like it remembered every secret buried in it. And for a moment, I wondered if it remembered mine too. I turned slowly, my eyes finding her again, the trembling figure curled in the far corner. The blanket around her clung to her shoulders like a frightened child. I whispered her name, barely letting the sound escape, as though the air itself might carry it somewhere dangerous. She didn't raise her head, didn't reach for me, but her lips parted just enough to form a single silent word. Run! No voice, no breath, just the shape of the word, trembling against the dim light. Behind me, a whisper slid from the hidden door, soft at first, then layered with something jagged, something too close to a cry. The rustling inside the room grew louder, as if whatever was in there had begun to move with intent. The warm glow leaking through the crack flickered like a heartbeat. I felt it pulse against the back of my neck. Above us, the footsteps rushed to the stairs. A hand hit the railing, then another, descending. Fast. I looked back at her, at the shaking shoulders, the familiar bracelet, the fear radiating off her like heat. She finally lifted her head, just enough for me to see her eyes. Wide, wet, begging me to do the thing she could not. Leave, but truth has a weight of its own. A quiet gravity that keeps you rooted even when every instinct screams otherwise. My feet refused to move, not yet. Not without understanding, not with that hidden room breathing behind me, and my daughter-in-law trembling in front of me. The whisper from the door sharpened. Something scraped softly across the floor inside, dragging, deliberate. The light widened for half a second, as if a shadow had passed in front of it. The footsteps on the stairs grew louder, closer, angrier. I had seconds, maybe less, and I stood there, caught between danger and truth, darkness and light, my breath frozen in my throat. She mouthed it again, one word, one plea, "Run!" But my heart whispered something else entirely. Stay and see. And in that moment, I knew the choice would change everything. The hallway light buzzed above me, flickering the way tired lights do just before sunrise. For a moment, everything felt suspended. The house, the shadows, even my own breath. Then the sound returned. Those footsteps, slow at first, then quicker, like someone realizing a mistake too late. I remember gripping the banister, my palm damp, the wood colder than it should have been. And in that quiet, in that held breath moment, something inside me whispered back at the darkness upstairs. Move. The staircase always creaked in the same places. Third step, seventh, and the last one where the nails stuck out a little. I'd learned those sounds the way people learn a song they don't want to remember. But that morning, the rhythm felt different, urgent. I climbed fast, nearly slipping, feeling the house tilt with each step. A draft pushed past me, carrying that strange stillness that comes right before something breaks. The kids' door was half open, the nightlight humming in its little corner. They were tangled in blankets, cheeks warm from sleep. For a second, just a second, I hesitated. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I didn't know what waited behind me. The pacing above stopped abruptly. Silence pressed against the walls like a held breath. I moved, scooped them both up, one sleepy head falling against my shoulder, the other mumbling something about a dream they wouldn't remember. Their warmth steadied me, even as my heart raced like it wanted to outrun everything inside that house. The floorboards groaned under my weight. Then another sound answered from upstairs. A soft shift, like someone leaning closer, listening. My fingers shook so badly I could barely twist the lock on the front door. The kids clung to me now, awake enough to sense something wrong, quiet enough not to ask. I kept my eyes forward, didn't dare look back. Not yet. The cold morning air hit me first, sharp, almost metallic, like it had been waiting outside the whole time. Darkness stretched across the yard, the kind that hides more than it shows. I stepped out anyway, one foot then the other. The children tightened their arms around my neck, small breaths brushing against my collarbone. Behind me, the house didn't scream or shudder or give itself away. It just stopped, silent again, as if whatever lived inside it had stepped back into the walls, as if it knew I no longer belonged there. We ran, down the path, past the fence, past the porch light that flickered once before dying completely. The sky was still dark, but a hint of blue clung to the horizon, the kind of blue that promises morning, even when night refuses to let go. I didn't look back until we reached the road. The house stood quiet, empty, or pretending to be, and in that stillness, a single thought settled heavy in my chest. I had escaped, but from what? And would it ever let me go?